Okay, I'm going to open it now.
Brilliant. Well, we'll get going, shall we? Yeah, I think the first thing is good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this webinar on unleashing the power of anchor institutions through networks. So I'm Tom Lloyd-Goodwin. I'm Associate Director of Policy here at CLES, the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, and I'm going to be chairing today's session. So as you know, I'm joined by three fantastic eminent speakers who are going to share learning from their experiences of helping to establish and coordinate anchor networks in their respective localities. I'll just give a brief introduction to them. They can say a bit more about themselves when they speak. But we've got firstly Conrad Park, the UK's first community wealth builder in residence, who coordinates the Birmingham Anchor Network and its activities, which currently have a particular focus on addressing the impact of COVID-19 in a big metropolitan area. We've got Alison Knight, who's the Executive Director of Neighbourhoods, and also Nikki Denston, who's a Service Manager, and they're both from Sandwell Council. So Sandwell, of course, borders Birmingham, so there's of course a real coalition of the willing developing here. This commitment to anchor networks, I think, shows how the seeds of progressive economics are really starting to flourish in the West Midlands. Great to see. And last but not least, we're also joined by Julie McLaughlin, who's a senior manager within economic policy at North Ayrshire Council. So this again gives us another flavour here of an anchor network within a different context. Namely Scotland, of course, where there is obviously a national government commitment to a wellbeing economy, and North Ayrshire has also got a bit more of a rural footprint than both Sandwell and Birmingham. So our speakers are going to take 10 minutes each to outline the ins and outs of developing an anchor network in their respective places. And this should give us around 25 minutes for questions. So I'm going to let them each speak, and then we're going to have questions at the end. Now, if you do want to pose a question, you can do so at any point by using the Q&A function that's built into Zoom, which I'm sure you must be all incredibly familiar with by now. Please do use this. You know, it'd be great to kind of make that 25 minutes a really rich and lively discussion. So any thoughts, comments, questions that you have, do post them in there, and we'll get them answered. Also, remember to say where you're from and who you are, just to add a little bit more depth and richness to this Zoom environment. Also, we're going to be recording the webinar, so we'll send you a link at the end so you can watch the webinar back. Okay, so just before we get to our speakers, I just want to give a quick summary about the point of this webinar. So, you know, as we continue to progress through this COVID-19 pandemic, harnessing the power of anchor institutions is really one of the key mechanisms that localities have to rescue, recover and reform. So obviously when we talk about anchor institutions, just briefly terminology, we're referring to large public, commercial or social sector organisations that can really exert a sizable influence in the local economy through their everyday activities, really. So the purchasing of goods and services, the employment of local people through kind of, you know, various employment strategies, and also by harnessing the power of their land, property and financial assets. So in terms of the impact that this has, anchor activity really starts to affect what we know as the social determinants of health. So income, wealth, economic equality, job stability, a sense of agency and access to safe and affordable housing. So what we're starting to see then in a growing number of localities is kind of local authorities, combined authorities, starting to lead what we're calling a whole-scale community wealth building approach across groups of different anchor institutions. So partnerships between the local council, the local NHS, universities, colleges, housing associations, police, fire and rescue. And over the last decade, and particularly in the last couple of years, we're seeing how networks of anchor institutions operating together, operating in concert, can really start to amplify their impact. So with that in mind, I'm gonna, this kind of leads us nicely into our speakers. So I'm gonna ask Conrad to kind of give us the perspective on what's going on in Birmingham. So Conrad, over to you, if you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us about the Birmingham Anchor Network.
Thank you, Tom. Apologies to everyone if my internet connection isn't great today. It seems to be playing up, but I think I can do so. I'll soldier on. Yeah, so I'm Conrad Park. I'm the coordinator of the Birmingham Anchor Institution Network. I've been in post since February. And in my presentation today, I'm going to talk through 4 topics. Just a general background of the development of the Birmingham Network to date, my role as the coordinator and what my basic function is, some of the challenges of developing a network in a large metropolitan area like Birmingham, and then finally finish off with just some specific examples of some of the actual projects we've got. Okay, so in terms of the background to the Birmingham network, Birmingham claims to be the largest local authority in the country. It is disputed, but Birmingham's proud of the fact that it is. 1.1 million people, huge diversity, and even though it's a large economy, it is a city with very significant areas and pockets of low income. The actual journey to an anchor network started 3 years ago with funding from Barrow Cadbury. They funded CLES to do a scoping project in Birmingham to see what an anchor network could look like, and then to do further work to start developing the first membership. That resulted in a leaders group meeting in September last year, 2019, with 7 institutions signed up to be the start of the Birmingham network. And those 7 were the City Council, University of Birmingham, Aston University, University Hospitals Trust, which has 6 hospitals in Birmingham, West Midlands Police and Crime Commission, then 2 neighbourhood-based housing associations, Bourneville Village Trust and the Pioneer Housing Group. And one of the interesting features of the Birmingham network is that there isn't a lead organisation. It's very much a cooperative, and that has good and bad points. Good is that everyone is equally committed, everyone has equal responsibility for making the network a success. But at times, not having a lead organisation, particularly my role as coordinator, can be difficult sometimes, because it'd be good to actually be able to refer to a person about what to do next, or run a report by them, or get agreement on the agenda for the next meeting, rather than having it to pass it always around 7 institutions. So there's a balance there. I think it's good in some ways that the local authority isn't leading in this case, because I think it might have actually put some other people off joining, but on the other hand, it does make organisation gaining momentum a bit slower. So in terms, so that's the first point. The second point is my role as a coordinator. What the anchor institutions decided to do was to all throw a little bit of money in a pot and jointly recruit a coordinator, myself, and I'm actually employed by CLES, so I'm also independent. My role is basically twofold. One is just to facilitate and coordinate the network. It operates on 3 tiers. There's a leadership group that meets annually to set direction for the coming year. There's a coordination group of people, director, assistant director level, who are my go-to steering group, who I meet with bi-monthly, and they set week-to-week, month-to-month agenda of priorities. And then we set up thematic working groups around different priorities and projects as they come up. So we've got employment working group, procurement working group. It's my job to coordinate those different tiers of the governance of the Birmingham Anchor Network. But my other job is to progress the project, work as a project officer. So when something's identified that we can make progress on, my job to make that progress takes place. And I think it's important to remember that, and of course I would say this because I'm the coordinator, but without a coordinator, this isn't anybody's job. And not only that, it may not be an area of expertise in your network to do this inter-partnership working, interagency working, joint agency project. And so maybe bringing in someone specific to that role may actually enable progress on network. So that's my job as the coordinator. Now, moving on to trying to set up a network and progress the network in Birmingham itself. The first challenge is simply scale. You know, Birmingham is a very big city, as I said, 1.1 million people. But it's also the scale of the different institution partners. We recently did a procurement baseline across the 7 institutions, and basically the City Council and the Hospital Trust account for something like 95% of the total spend of the network. And so the other 5 are kind of saying, well, what's the significance of our contribution to this in terms of local procurement, when the other 2 institutions just dominate so massively that they're spent in the billions on an annual basis, whereas housing associations, it's in 1 or 2 million. But nevertheless, what we're working to do is to find common ground across those institutions so we can get buy-in from all of them as to our procurement project. And I'll come back to that at the very end of my talk. The other challenge was membership. When we did the scoping work, we set a definition of what an anchor institution was. And this isn't a universal definition, it's Birmingham's definition. And they said non-private sector, at least 250 employees, and a spend of over 5 million per year. In Birmingham, that meant 42 different organisations, which was immediately identified as being too unwieldy. So, which is why we've settled on 7, who are the 7 most willing to join up and get this thing going. And at the moment, we're actually keeping it to 7 for the sake of making it manageable. But at a later date, we're going to have to consider either increasing membership or setting up different memberships for Birmingham. The other challenge of working in Birmingham is distractions. We've got the Commonwealth Games coming in 2022. We've got High Speed 2 being developed. There are other large developments, and trying to get the anchor network on the map as a significant player in the future economic recovery of Birmingham has been an ongoing negotiation to find the gap, to find its purpose between all these other, what are seen as high profile, high spend developments. The other challenge, I think, of working in Birmingham is sense of belonging. And I think you'll hear a contrast to this when we hear the Sandwell presentation. So, University of Birmingham, Redbrick University, it sees itself as an international university first, rather than a Birmingham university. At the other extreme, we've got the 2 housing associations that are very, very place-based within this huge Birmingham metropolitan area. And so getting this collective sense of belonging and a collective sense of contribution to the wider Birmingham economy has been an ongoing discussion. But moving on to the last part of my presentation, the way we've done this is, rather than to sit down and try and map out an exhaustive strategy or an exhaustive action plan that encompasses all the opportunities, all the potential, all the ways we can contribute to Birmingham, particularly in the post-COVID sense, we've actually gone forward in a project-specific way. And to do that, as an opening gambit, what I did was speak to 7 institutions and say, what problem can we solve for you? On the understanding that buy-in and commitment throughout a whole organisation would be enabled if, not only if the institutions are contributing to the greater good, but they're also making that delivery of their own services more successful. To highlight an example of this, the Hospital Trust said they're looking to recruit. They've got a challenge around recruitment and retention of staff coming into winter pressures. Whereas our housing associations were saying their problem is lots of residents on furlough, particularly from the hospitality sector, and facing redundancy when furlough ends. So what we set up is a project called Hospitality to Health, which so the hospital's doing an outreach pre-employment program into these communities to help people do a career switch from hospitality into the health sector. And at the moment, we've got our first 10 residents going through the program. Now, 10 might not sound like a lot in the greater scheme of things, but what we're really aiming for through this specific project is culture change and the change in the way these institutions work together. And even though Hospitality to Health is only recently off the ground, we've already had 2 further developments of it, where the hospital is recruiting through these housing associations for the workforce. They need to roll out vaccinations, and we've got people directly employed into that work. And just today, I got a message from the hospital that they're looking to recruit into something called lamp testing, which I've never heard of before, but saliva testing, and they need biomedics. So we're working with the 2 hospitals, working with the 2 universities now, to recruit biomedics from last year's graduation class. And so what I hope that demonstrates is that a little action creates a bigger culture change that creates a rollout to further positive. I've had my 2-minute warning, so I think I'll end there. But hopefully I've given you a background into how we've approached it in Birmingham, but look forward to hearing from Sandwell and Ayrshire to hear contrasting stories.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much, Conrad. That's great. Yeah, we've already got questions coming in, so we'll get to those in the in the Q&A. But Alison and Nikki, would you like to introduce yourselves and tell us what you're up to in Sandwell?
Thank you. Yes. Good morning, everyone. I'm just a bit worried because I think there might be a fire alarm actually in Nikki's building. She's just messaged me to tell me this. So Nikki, if you need to leave, we'd rather you left than saw flames rising up on the screen and anything happening. Okay, so anyway, I'm Alison Knight. I'm Executive Director at Sandwell, and you know, I've been strategically leading the developments with the Anchor Network, but the person who's been doing all the work and who may have to leave shortly is actually Nikki, and I thought she would bring a really interesting perspective to the work that's being done and the workshops that we've held, which I thought gave another side to it. So first of all, Conrad's talked a little bit about Birmingham and about how large it is, which it certainly feels like the largest council. So I don't know who's disputing that, but I'm pretty sure they are the largest. We're actually the, if you need to leave, Nikki, she's even taking it. This is definitely commitment here, taking a laptop with her as she goes. We're the 3rd largest Met in the West Midlands. We have a population of around 330,000 people, and we border Sandwell, but also Wolverhampton, Walsall and Dudley, so right in the middle of the Birmingham Black Country conurbation. Very, very heavily populated, and a deprived area actually. We're the 12th most deprived local authority area. And Sandwell itself is quite an interesting mix actually, because it was only sort of brought into being in the late 70s as a metropolitan area. So there isn't really a town called Sandwell. There's a place called Sandwell, historical place, just outside of West Bromwich. But the identities can be quite different across Sandwell. Some parts being more akin to Birmingham, some to Wolverhampton, some to Dudley. And you can see that in the mix of the 6 towns that there are in Sandwell, that they all have very different identities. So it means that we have something very different, that we have different organisations. And in March this year, which was probably timing wasn't best here, but in March this year, we launched an inclusive economy deal. We'd done a lot of work with CLES and other partners, and we'd pulled together a deal which involved how do we make the most, and Conrad talked about this, how do we make the most of the investment that's coming into the area. We're also part of the Commonwealth Games. The Aquatic Centre is going to be in Sandwell. We have the tram, we have lots of other big investments. How do we make the most and make sure people are getting you know, the benefits of that investment? And CLES did a piece of work for us which showed that only 15% of our budget is actually spent locally through local business, which was shocking actually for an area like Sandwell. So the inclusive economy deal was meant to start and tackle that. And then, of course, 2 weeks after full council, we go into the first lockdown and things had to go on hold. But what it did going into the lockdown was really show how partnership is absolutely key to pulling us through a crisis. Our voluntary sector pulled together, we worked really closely with them. Our business community helped us as we set up food hubs, as we helped the elderly. And the rest of the public sector that we worked with, we all pulled together really more than ever before. So as we started to look at the impacts, and we can see that now, we all know what those impacts are, and we've heard all the depressing stories about that in the news. We could see that unemployment had more than doubled in Sandwell, that we had some serious other issues around mental health, around skills, around actual jobs being available. And we talked as partners, and people said they were really keen to help. And we said, well, actually, we want to set up an anchor network. We'd got some funding as well through Barra Cadbury. We talked to Conrad and to Neil, but we felt this was going to be a slightly different type of anchor network to help us come out of the pandemic, and to use the community wealth principles as a real driver to help us get through that. So I'm going to move on. Nikki, are you sure there's not a fire somewhere, and are you okay?
No, I've been told it was a test. It was nearly an outside broadcast, but no, it was a test, so we're okay.
Good. So that leads on nicely to you saying what you did then, setting up the network and the initial workshops that we've ran, and the interest in that. Okay.
Yeah. I think sort of listening to Conrad, I think some of the things that Sandwell did probably different to Birmingham was probably around our mobilisation and how quick we did that. I think, as Conrad mentioned, there was no sort of lead authority on Birmingham. Sandwell took the lead really, and I think that was in response to the COVID pandemic. I think, as Alison mentioned, the fact that we got lots of partnerships already underway helping us to deal with the pandemic meant that we'd already got sort of willing participants really. So what we did is to try and move that on quite quickly. And as the lead authority, we made sure that the governance was in place. We set up a community wealth and economic resilience board that's chaired by one of our cabinet members. And that board really has got a wealth of different types of organisations on there. Again, I think one of the differences between Sandwell and Birmingham is that Sandwell necessarily hasn't got large industries or large businesses with huge turnovers or employee numbers. What we wanted to do really to make sort of Sandwell's network unique was around getting people involved that really had an interest and really had an impact in Sandwell. So it wasn't about the size of their organisation, it was about what they wanted to do for Sandwell, their commitment to Sandwell. And that's why we've got people like the Sandwell Council for Voluntary Organisations as one of our key partners. They represent lots of voluntary organisations across Sandwell, and we have got, I think Alison mentioned, a really thriving voluntary sector within Sandwell who are really keen to get involved. And we're going to be having a voluntary sector workshop just after Christmas, because there is a real sort of appetite from small organisations up to large organisations. And what we didn't want to do was particularly exclude anybody. So although the network, we've had our initial workshop, we are intending to do more work outside of that in different task and finish groups, just to make sure that anybody that wants to get involved can get involved in some way. I think for us as well, the response to the pandemic meant that we had to source local really. Alison mentioned the food hub, and we really struggled at the beginning of that to get national supplies of food to support our vulnerable people, and we had to go and source locally. And we engaged with lots of local suppliers, warehouses, bakeries, things like that. And they really helped us, but we also helped them by getting engaged with them. And actually some of those businesses might not have actually been here today if we hadn't have used them. And I think that local element of it has meant that we do see the benefit of that, and not necessarily, you know, all of that huge organisations. I think we have got a delivery plan that we've produced, but we're trying to do some of the baby steps as well to start off with. So looking to engage with those local people and to build up into the bigger things. Our first Anchor Network took place a couple of weeks ago. We had over 20 participants from people from CCG, Sandwell College, Birmingham City University. There's a range of people on there, as I mentioned, the voluntary organisation sector. Really good workshop. We focused on 3 particular areas: progressive procurement, skills and employment, and the economic recovery from COVID. We had lots of discussions as part of that, and it was really good to get lots of people's views on all of those things. What we've done since then is to develop a survey on Microsoft Teams, and we got people to rank some of the actions and some of the real priorities, and that's come back. We're in the process of analysing that at the moment, but it does show us some real things that we can actually get going on. And what we wanted to do was to ensure that we hadn't just got a longer term plan, that we got some quick wins as well. We really you know, wanted to make sure that this wasn't seen as a bit of a flash in the pan, and actually you know, we wanted to make sure that people could see our commitment and get people involved. And once people see that there's some momentum behind things, and then we think, you know, obviously they'll want to come and they'll want to get involved. The feedback from the workshop was really good. I think we got 4 3/4 stars out of 5. But it was something that I think everybody got something out of. And the feedback again is that you know, I think 95% of people want to be involved in the Anchor Network going forward. And we really see that as being you know, something that's really going to help Sandwell sort of recover from the economic impact that it definitely has. So I think, you know, as is, you know, we've been working with Conrad, and obviously Conrad's got his sort of his views from Birmingham and how he's been working. But I think, you know, for us, it's about, you know, one size doesn't necessarily fit all, and actually it's about your sort of local area and how that can actually impact. So I think, you know, it's about looking at your organisation, your partnerships that you've already got, you know, and not excluding sort of that local element, which is really important. So I think I've probably covered everything there, I think. So yeah, happy to take any questions in the chat.
Great stuff. Thanks so much, Nikki. That's brilliant. Okay, Julie, I'm going to hand over to you to give us the view from North Ayrshire, and then we'll move into some questions.
Thanks, Tom. Just bear with me a few moments while I load some slides. But thanks very much to CLES for the opportunity to speak to you today about the work that we've been doing in North Ayrshire on community wealth building, and also across the Ayrshire region as a whole through our Community Wealth Building Commission. Tom, could you let me know if the slides are okay?
Yep, they're looking good to me.
Perfect, thank you. So it's really a delight for me to be here with some other areas to also learn about their experience in setting up Anchor networks, because I think a key theme that's coming through today already is that there's no one size fits all approach to this. So I think it's great there's a diverse range of places presenting today. For those that don't know North Ayrshire, we're a local authority in the southwest of Scotland. A post-industrial area is, I think, an accurate term for our economy. We suffer some of the highest levels of poverty and inequality in Scotland. We have the highest claimant count rate in Scotland as well, one of the lowest job densities, and last year we also declared a climate emergency. So I think what that shows is that the current approach is probably not working for places like North Ayrshire and Ayrshire, and so we have to think differently about how we develop our economy, about how we maximise the assets that we already have as anchor institutions. So we launched our community wealth building strategy in May this year during the pandemic. For us, it's about a new economic model focused on enhancing inclusion and well-being. So as I've said, traditional approaches clearly have not worked for North Ayrshire, and you can see our mission there set out, which is closely aligned to our council plan. So this is a key priority for the whole of the council. To start our journey, we worked with CLES in 2019 to undertake a diagnostic of where North Ayrshire was against each of the community wealth building pillars. And that was really influential in shaping some of the work that we went on to do through the Commission and also through the council and the services within the council. So last year we established a Community Wealth Building Commission that's made up of key local, regional and anchor institutions in the area. And that's really about how we embed the principles of community wealth building within those organisations, and where can we identify opportunities for collaboration to maximise outcomes. We've engaged extensively across our communities. In North Ayrshire, we have 6 locality partnerships, which we've engaged with, and also with senior leaders and staff within the organisation, because it's really important that community wealth building isn't just seen as an economic development initiative. Very much everyone involved in buying goods, employing staff, managing land and assets needs to have an understanding of the economic levers that they have to shape and influence the economy. So when we launched our strategy in May, Scotland's first community wealth building strategy, we set out 6 objectives for what we want to achieve in North Ayrshire. The Commission were very influential in shaping this strategy for North Ayrshire Council as well, and feeding in and critically reviewing this. So I'll give a brief overview of our objectives. It's about becoming a community wealth building council, so working across all of our services and viewing everything that we do as a council through a community wealth building lens. It's about maximising our local spend, in fact growing our local spend to support a more resilient business base, and also to improve supplier development and capacity as well. And I think a key theme that you'll probably see running through my presentation is the link that this has to the climate emergency and how we can use community wealth building as a tool to help tackle climate change. So shorter supply chains naturally will have less of an impact on our environment. Around fair employment and creating fair and meaningful jobs with progression opportunities, and ensuring that they're open to local people as well. Around land and assets, we're committed to reviewing all of our land and assets to ensure that they have benefits for communities, businesses, and also help in our journey to net zero. We're committed to investing locally, but also exploring innovative local finance initiatives, such as building on our work on participatory budgeting, on our community investment fund, and exploring the feasibility of a community bank. And finally, around plural ownership, how we create a more diverse local business base with more inclusive business models as well. So the Community Wealth Building Commission is made up of the key local and regional anchor institutions. It started off very much focused on community planning partners in North Ayrshire, so mainly the public sector and the third sector. And I guess a key reason for that is the majority of employment comes from the public sector in North Ayrshire, but we're also considering our next steps and how we, building on the work of an anchor charter that I'll say a bit about, how we get wider anchors involved in this work, including from the private sector as well, through the development of a network that feeds into the Community Wealth Building Commission. We've had an initial short life working group on procurement and looked at our local spends across Ayrshire, which is around 1 billion per annum. So a massive economic opportunity there if we can direct more of that spend locally. But it's not just about procurement. We're looking at key other areas such as fair employment and land and assets. And the Commission is coincidentally meeting later today to agree a work plan for the future. And we're delighted that we've extended the work of the Commission beyond just the North Ayrshire Local Authority to include all of the Ayrshire region and our neighbouring local authorities, East and South Ayrshire, have now joined the Commission as well. A key first step that we've taken is to develop an anchor charter, which you can see here. And that's really about getting the anchors in the region to commit to pledges around community wealth building. So we've set out pledges across the 5 pillars of community wealth building, but also the environment and climate action as well. And we'd anticipate people who sign the charter are able to evidence how they're delivering the pledges that they've committed to, such as co-producing plans with local communities around land and assets, around enhancing their local spend, working with partners on supplier development as well. And so we're delighted that when we launched this as part of Challenge Poverty Week in October, that 6 of the key anchored institutions in the region have signed up, including the Health Board. And I think that's really important because health institutions can play a huge role in supporting the local economy and also have impact on wider wellbeing, including health as well. And earlier this month, a third sector interface, the Ayrshire Community Trust, also committed to signing the charter. So I guess that shows that anchor institutions that are not viewed as traditional anchor institutions like councils, like health, can also play a key role in delivering community wealth building. So if I reflect on some of the key lessons from our journey, I think what's really important when you're working with other anchor institutions is to set a vision that's clear and has buy-in to it, but it's also quite practical and is focused on action and not just a high level mission, but also actions that are deliverable. And we've been really fortunate in North Ayrshire that a council leader has played a key role in bringing other partners to the table and influencing. Anchor education and collaboration. This definitely takes time and investment. It takes resource. Anchor institutions need to understand their role in the role that they can play in supporting the economy. So, for example, this afternoon we have Scottish Fire and Rescue Service doing a presentation at our Community Wealth Building Commission on how they're adapting to deliver community wealth building. Now, you wouldn't naturally think that a fire and rescue service had a role to play in supporting the economy, but if you look into it, they can play a key role. So I think it's about changing mindsets and also exploring some key opportunities for working together as well. And I guess we need to rethink the way that we traditionally do things within silos as well. And when you are taking such a different approach, it's important to be able to show quick wins and demonstrate success as well. Bottom-up engagement and place-based investment. I guess there's no point in anchors exploring more local spend if there isn't a thriving local business base with social enterprises, community businesses to access those opportunities. And finally, getting challenging feedback, getting external views, learning from other places is key. And we've established a community wealth building expert panel, which is chaired by Wellbeing Economy Alliance Scotland. So I'm looking forward to answering any questions as part of the Q&A and hearing other perspectives as well. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much, Julie. Yeah, that's great. Kind of, yeah, I think we've had 3 different perspectives there, and we've got some good questions emerging from the audience. Just a point of clarity. One person's just mentioned about kind of this idea of, we've been talking about anchor strategies and also about community wealth building principles as well. We're kind of using these things interchangeably here, I suppose. When we talk about community principles, there's 5 principles, just for clarity of that. So we're talking about progressive procurement, progressive employment practices, progressive use of land, progressive use of finance, and then how you create a more plural and democratic economy involving, more SMEs, more cooperatives, more social enterprises, more community businesses. So those are the kind of the essential principles. But those can be anchor strategies as well. Lots of areas talk about anchor strategies, and they would be basically strategies about how you go about being more progressive with your employment, your procurement, your land and assets, your property, and the development of a plural economy. So just to kind of make that point clear the audience. Okay, so yeah, let's dig into this a little bit then. Yeah, Conrad, firstly, a question about the procurement work that you've been doing in Birmingham. This is from Brian Connolly at Scottish Enterprises, and he says he'd be keen to learn more about how you've used procurement to engage the third sector in opportunities under 25 grand tenders. So could you say a bit more about that? I know you've got this kind of figure of £25,000 for your for how you're kind of targeting procurement opportunities to local businesses and the community sector. So could you say a bit about that?
Yeah, I'll switch my video off in the hope of improving my sound quality. Yeah, this is a piece of work that's in development at the moment. It's quite an involved piece of work, and I think I'll probably end up writing a blog on it so I can give the full story. But very briefly, I referred to the fact in my presentation, the difference in scale of the network members in Birmingham. Some spending the billions, some spending the millions. One area of commonality are the under 25k contracts. And one of the partners came to us and said, look, for an under 25k contract, all I need are 3 tenders. Those 3 tenders come from high social value businesses based in Birmingham, you know, interest companies, social enterprise, community interest companies, and one of them will win and the work can go to them. But the problem is I don't know who they are. And then when we've gone to the other side of the coin and gone out to that sector, they don't know how to get into the supply chain, large anchor institutions. So the idea, and it's still an idea at the moment, but it's gathering momentum, is to build a hub next to the supply and the demand side. Works with small businesses to give them the know-how how to tender successfully, and gives the large institutions an easy way into that sector. They can send their contracts to the hub. The hub can then send it out to the high social value businesses and get a direct pipeline through. That's it in very, very simple terms. There's a lot more to it than that, which I think I'll write up. But that's where we are with that idea.
That's great, thanks, Conrad. And yeah, actually, we are going to be releasing a kind of a short how-to guide as well. I'm giving the game away. Actually, we're going to announce this at the end of the webinar, but that's actually got a little bit more detail about that kind of the £25,000 example that Conrad talks about. That's great, thanks, Conrad. Maybe a question to Sandwell now. I suppose we've had a question about. It's interesting. This was actually it was from Julie Slay. It was kind of directed to Birmingham, but it applies to everyone really. And actually, I think maybe it's interesting to ask you at Sandwell because you're just getting going. Really, Julie's really interested to hear about governance arrangements in terms of your network, but also kind of wider engagement as well. So, how do you engage with other local organisations like arts and culture, community organisations who aren't technically anchors but are very important to keep engaged? So Alison and Nikki, could you maybe say something on that?
Yeah, thanks for that. In terms of the governance, as Nikki mentioned, we have a community wealth and economic resilience board, which we've just set up as we're starting to come out. Well, we hope we're starting to come out of the pandemic. And we set that up on the back of some impact work that we did. So that is our key sort of partners, as it were. And then from that, we've got the wider Anchor network, which consists of those people plus more. So the overall governance is really under that particular group. In terms of engaging with wider partners, you know, it's an interesting point actually, because we've done a lot of work on trying to increase the cultural offer across Sandwell. And there is an awful lot of cultural activity, an awful lot of different partnerships across Sandwell, and we've developed our own network, a culture network. So what we're actually doing is we're going to link some of that in, and that's probably a next steps really. How do we get some of those involved? We have some big organisations. For now, what we decided to do was to keep some of the key voluntary sector, public sector partners and big business. But I think that is definitely one for the future, and is a point well made, actually.
Great stuff. I've got some questions that I'm going to kind of direct to all of you, but there's another question that I was thinking that maybe I'll ask to Julie, actually, that because it ties in with the kind of the recent anchor charter that you've set up. So I suppose Conrad and I have been reflecting on this in this publication that we'll kind of be releasing at the end of the session today. And what we discussed in relation to Birmingham is actually that political buy-in's relatively easy or relatively straightforward to obtain, but it's kind of the more of the middle managers engagement that's kind of the challenge here. Have you got a view on that in North Ayrshire? Because actually, you've just gone through an exercise of engaging that or arranging that kind of political buy-in. Was that kind of a relatively straightforward exercise, or were the challenges that you had to overcome there?
I think, as I mentioned in the presentation, we have been fortunate that this has been really driven by Councillor Joe Cullinan. So that's made it easy to get wider political buy-in. So within the Commission now, key part of the membership is elected members from each of the 3 Ayrshire councils of varying political colours. So I think that's really important in garnering that consensus. In terms of actually the middle managers and the officers being more of a barrier, this is something that comes through a lot, and this is where it's important around education. Why should we be focusing on this stuff? What is your role in it? And changing mindsets as well, because different sectors have very set views on, oh, this is the way we do this, we've always done it this way. But actually you need to change the mindset in that, and really everyone working for a local authority or an anchor institution who has some form of a budget, who works with local businesses, who engages with communities, maybe looks after a building or employs people, all have economic influence on the economy. So it does take time and investment to develop that awareness and education, and we've been very fortunate that CLES have been really supportive of us. Neil came to the very first meeting of the commission to set out what this is and why it's important for them to consider it, and also to staff leadership conferences as well, to raise that awareness as well. And I think it's good having an external person there too to kind of enforce that. So those would be my key reflections on that area, Tom.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, Conrad, would you like to maybe say a little bit more about that? Because we've had, I suppose, quite detailed discussions around, the challenges of. I think that's great in terms of Julie set up the kind of the stuff around the political buy-in there. But I know that you've done a lot more work in terms of engaging middle managers. How have you gone about doing that in Birmingham?
Yeah, in very simple terms, I found getting buy-in at a senior level very simple. Who wouldn't want to buy into supporting your local economy, employing more local people, spending more through local businesses? The challenge is when that gets passed down through the organisation to the people who actually have to do the job, and it lands on their desk as yet another responsibility. Land on their desk with that extra resources to do it. It lands on their desk with that extra authority to be able to mobilise it. And so the approach we've taken, I've referred to very briefly in my presentation, is a problem-solving approach. When I did some work with the hospital a few years back on local procurement, we really struggled to get anywhere. And then we sat down and really looked at it. It was because I was making the procurement team's job harder, asking them for locally, and hence it was hitting a stumbling block, because procurement actually wasn't a problem for them. They didn't have a problem purchasing what they needed. The problem they had was employing. They had a problem with recruiting and retaining staff. So when we refocused onto that to solve a problem for the hospital, it just took off, because they were really bought into making it work. It made the middle managers' job easier, and their workers on the front line got what they were doing and what they were trying to do. So I really, really emphasise and support the problem and solving approach for the institutions to get their buy-in.
Great stuff. Thanks, Conrad. I've got a question here from Jenny McConnell, who's really interested in that kind of this different understanding of place that you might have in a local area, and the work that the networks might have done to kind of to resolve this, to deal with the fact that, of course, in local areas there are different understandings of place. Sandwell, what have you done to kind of to think about that? Has it been an issue? Have you had to kind of do anything to address this idea of place?
Sorry, can you repeat that? Do you know something? My Wi-Fi is going out now, so
Don't you worry.
apologies for that. No, sorry.
It's not at all. No, it's around this idea of different understandings of place within a locality.
I thought that was what you'd
yeah,
said.
and has that been an issue in Sandwell, and what have you done to address that?
Yeah, no, it definitely is a big issue in Sandwell, actually, because as I mentioned in my overview, we've got 6 different towns which are very, very different. You know, you've got Smethwick, which pretty much is akin to Birmingham, yet you've got Tipton, which borders Dudley and Wolverhampton, Wednesbury closer to sort of Walsall, Wolverhampton, Oldbury. So they have very different identities, actually. And really understanding that sense of place and what people feel that they identify with, I think is very important, and has meant that we've had to think about that with the partners that we have on the board and the representatives, really. So it's not just about the sense of place as in physical place, it is about that community, and particularly bringing everybody together so they don't think that it's becoming too, I suppose, Birmingham centric or all around West Bromwich, which is the key town. It's showing them that we're actually keen on developing all of the networks across all of the areas.
Thanks, Alison. Julie, is that something that you kind of share from a North Ayrshire's perspective?
I think this question about place is really interesting, really important. As I mentioned in the presentation, within North Ayrshire we have 6 localities, so you could argue that each one of those could have their own kind of place-based strategy. And I mentioned one of our lessons was around this bottom-up engagement, and that's why I think it's really important to invest in resources to take this forward. What we've done is invest in new resource for community wealth building, which will be complemented by some growth deal investment as well, hopefully from the Scottish Government next year. And that's about working within these localities to understand where they are and what are the opportunities across the pillars. For example, what does the local supply chain look like in the urban locality for North Ayrshire? What are the opportunities around land and assets within a town in the Garnock Valley in North Ayrshire? So I think that you know, there are varying scales of place, and then take that right up to the regional work that we're doing. Where are the big strategic opportunities that we can look at around joining up procurement spend to make it easier for suppliers to bid in? So there are different levels for place, and for each of those you will need different approaches. But I think it, you know, goes back to the point that Conrad's made as well. It does take resource and investment, but it's really important that we are working within communities and alongside businesses on this, and not just speaking amongst ourselves in the public sector.
That's great, thanks, Julie. Yeah, I mean, on that kind of the wider question of resources, we've obviously in the Birmingham network, we've got Conrad working between the different anchor institutions to kind of, I suppose, to turbocharge the activity. Really, is that something that you're thinking about in Sandwell, and then maybe Julie, we get you to reflect on that as well. But yeah, Alison and Nikki, are you looking to appoint some kind of intermediary that can work between the anchors?
Yeah, we are. We've got some funding as well with CLES from Barrow Cadbury, so we're looking to appoint a similar sort of coordinator as part of it, because I think, as somebody mentioned, you know, it's not my day job either. So I think Conrad mentioned it at the beginning. So then it becomes, you know, it is more difficult then. So I think that support will be really valuable, and we're having support obviously from CLES at the moment in terms of looking at the sort of economics around our anchor institutions, which is really useful as well, and having that insight. So I think, you know, you do need that sort of dedicated resource really to actually give it the time and space to be able to grow it effectively. We've done quite a lot in a short space of time, but I think, you know, to do what we really want to do, it does need to have that dedicated resource and that sort of wraparound support, really.
Brilliant, thanks, Nikki. And Julie, I suppose in Scotland, we've obviously there's community planning partnerships, which are a slightly more formal arrangement, like a formal arrangement of anchor institutions that exist anyway. Are there existing kind of coordinator roles that can help support what you're doing Scotland, or are you going to have to appoint somebody specific to turbocharge this activity?
Yeah, there are existing roles focused on community planning partnerships. I guess that the focus of community planning partnerships in the remit is so wide that I do feel you really need that dedicated input and focus around the economy and community wealth building, and that's why we established the commission as the driving force around that. We have invested in a community wealth building coordinator who was appointed earlier this year as part of 9 new community wealth building roles in the council. And what we're looking at as well through the commission is in developing the work plan that I've spoken about, where can different anchors take a lead on something that they have really particular expertise, and where can they coordinate and coalesce partners, because back to that thing, it's sometimes good not to have one person or one organisation solely driving this, but having different people around it. I think what's also important, and it goes back to a previous point I made, is when you feel that you do need that kind of external facilitator resource. We've used CLES in the past around that, coming into the commission, maybe seeing things and prompting things that I couldn't see as well. So I think bringing that external input and that independent input in is important too, and that's a key area we see that the expert panel playing into. And they were really instrumental in guiding some of the thinking around the anchor charter and really pushing us on that too. So I think all of those areas are important.
That's great, thanks, Julie. Drew, I'm going to ask one final question. I might direct this to Conrad initially, but just get any other thoughts as well from our other panelists. Conrad, a question here from Liz Bickerton, who works in rural Mid Wales, who kind of mentions that their economic base is overwhelmingly micro businesses and SMEs. And could you say a bit more about the kind of the barriers and successes that you faced in starting to try and work with them to bring them into these kind of procurement opportunities that you're looking to expand on in Birmingham?
I wish I could claim successes. I think it's too early to do that. But what we have done a lot of work on is understanding the problems. What are the barriers to doing this? And it really goes back to my previous answer of recognising that there's a missing piece in the jigsaw. The large institutions are genuinely committed to wanting to procure from local SMEs. They don't know who they are. They don't know how to work with them. Frankly, they haven't got the time to do it, to do that field work, to go out and build relationships and partnerships, or indeed to actually monitor the social value of what they're getting. And on the flip side, the small businesses don't know how to get. So the idea we've got is to put a resource in the middle that can enable both sides of that equation. It sounds brilliant in principle. Everybody's signing up to it as something they want to pursue. I'm sure it's going to be far harder than that in reality. That's the approach. Recognizing you've actually got to do something proactive in this to make this work properly.
Great, thanks, Conrad. Nikki and Alison, any thoughts on how you're going to engage those kind of small micro businesses in those procurement opportunities?
Yeah, we've had a lot of thoughts actually, and you know, we've got a business ambassadors network, which we're going to try and utilize that far more. It is about, the key thing is working with our procurement team actually, and I know that sounds a bit sort of from the top down or whatever, but I think unless we get them on board with the social value needs, and also an understanding, one of the things that I've been really frustrated about recently is a piece of work that we've gone out with on a master plan. And so many smaller organisations haven't been able to tender because of the public liability insurance levels that we require as a council. So it's trying to make sure that our procurement team understand that actually it isn't a big, you don't need that level of public liability insurance. It doesn't leave us at risk, and you could do it less and it would encourage more. So it's little things like that actually. So it's definitely working with the providers and the businesses, but tackling the procurement fallacies in some ways as well.
Okay, great. Julie, any very brief final comments from you on that just before we wrap up?
A few brief points. difficult but not impossible. It's about breaking down silos, working across business development and procurement, understanding the local supply chains and where there are opportunities for capacity building.
Thanks so much, Julie. That's great. Well, I'm conscious of time. It is indeed 11 o'clock, and that's our hour up, I'm afraid. I've found this fascinating, and we could probably go on for another hour getting into all sorts of things. You know, yeah, we'll reflect on this and think about, you know, where we might go next with some of these webinars. But yeah, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of our speakers, to Conrad, Nikki, Julie, and to Alison for their input, and for, yeah, a great webinar, I think. Thank you.